everyone to take their seats. So for those people who weren't at the opening ceremony last night, my name is Kate Silverton. I'm delighted to be here in my capacity as a journalist and broadcaster, as well as a mum-to-be, as I was saying last night, with a professional and, of course, personal interest in the issues that we're going to be discussing over the next 2 days. It's a real privilege to be here. I'll be moderating some of the sessions throughout. Now, just to recap, can I just close that door because there's somebody having quite a loud conversation? Can I just, sorry. Thank you. So to recap then on some of the statistics we heard last night. Unprecedented strides have been made in education since 2000, at least in quantitative terms, with the number of out-of-school children having dropped by nearly half from over 100 million to 57 million. Now, the issues that we are going to be discussing today revolve around the qualitative aspect of education because that remains a pressing challenge. At the same time, we have new technologies that allow a child anywhere on the planet to take a course from Harvard or MIT. Access to connectivity can also equal access to not just all the world's information, but also new tools of instruction. But there's a massive strain on nascent national education systems. So the question this morning that we're going to address is, are we now at an inflection point in global education? As we were discussing last night, can the private and the public and social sectors come together to create really quick systemic change rather than just incremental change? If the system, if not broken, is out of kilter, how do we address some of the issues that we will have raised over the next 2 days? And what are the key factors to get to this massive change that so many are now calling on? Let's put that first question to our speakers. Irina, I'd like to start with you, Irina Bokova for UNESCO. Your thoughts, an overview, please, on where we stand in terms of global education today and what are the main essences of change that you would like to see us focus on?
Kate, I think this is probably the most important question now that we stand less than 700 days before the end of the Millennium Development Goals by the end of 2015. And all the figures and all the assessment that we are making, including our last global monitoring report that we just published, show that we are at a threshold. Either we really take education seriously and tackle with this global learning crisis, or we will not reach what the international community and the United Nations have set forth as a target by eliminating extreme poverty by 2030, and then moving also in this age of progress in new technologies.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? Are you all hearing Irina? Because my panelist, you can't hear Irina. Okay, so I'm going to carry on with Irina, but for those gentlemen on the sound, we are having difficulty on the panel hearing what Irina is having to say, which of course is crucial for our panel guests this morning. Is that the same for all of you? Otherwise we're going to have to huddle up, I think. So for those people on sound, if we can address that as soon as possible, that would be great. Can I just have a raise of hands at the back? Can you all hear Irina from your perspective? You can hear. Great. Okay, well that's one good thing. I might have to recap slightly for the rest of you. Okay, well Irina, can I ask you to just carry on? If you maybe bring it slightly closer, it might help.
Yeah, thank you. I think they increased now a little bit, right? Yeah. I wanted to say that we have to tackle with a very serious situation. We call it a learning crisis. Let me just be very clear that lack of access to education and bad quality of education costs countries in the world 129 billion every year. Our figures show that we have to concentrate on where needs are most acute. We have to reach the marginalized. We have to look at the girls' education. We have to look at minorities' education. We have to look at the communities which cannot be reached at this particular moment. If the current step of achieving education for all, which is the second Millennium Development Goal, if we continue business as usual, like we are doing now, I think yesterday Rebecca mentioned it, citing our global monitoring report, this means that girls from poor rural areas in Africa and some other parts in the world will reach primary education by 2086. This is a situation that definitely we cannot accept. We know that we need to reach the marginalized. We have to focus financing for education. Only 56 countries in the world will reach a parity in primary education by the year 2015. We know that in the secondary education, dropouts of girls from schooling makes it that only 38 countries will reach gender parity in secondary education also by the year 2015.
So, okay.
And with the poor quality, if you allow me, with the poor quality of education, we still have 250 million young people in the world, albeit they have been in formal schooling, that cannot read and write. So access, equity, and quality of education. And here is where the question of teachers come, which is extremely important. We lack 6 million teachers in the world. Only, we know that 3 out of 4 teachers in poor countries have not passed through a formal training, and this also adds to the poor quality of education. So we really need to tackle a learning crisis that is emerging in the world.
Okay, so from Irina's perspective, there is a crisis. The question then to the rest of you is, what do we do about it from your own perspective? Who would like to pick up? Salil. Salil Shetty from Amnesty International, Secretary General, Amnesty International.
Thank you, Kate. I think first and foremost, from an Amnesty International perspective, it's important to recognize that education is a fundamental human right. And obviously, when you asked what do we have to do about it, I think it's very important to see education within an overall human rights framework. Otherwise, we might not be able to deal with the underlying issues. So, for example, the challenge we're facing today, yes, there's been a lot of cause for celebration, there's been important progress, but the numbers we are talking about who are either still excluded from education or who are not really able to read and write, even in a basic sense, is just staggering. And most of the problems today, of course, there's one of the reasons why people are cut off from education is simply because of geographical distances and lack of resourcing. But a big challenge we're facing today is the challenge of growing inequality, and that is fundamentally linked to discrimination and prejudice. So whether it comes to lack of access for girls, for minorities, for indigenous people, there you're really dealing with the core human rights issue of discrimination and exclusion.
Rebecca from the Brookings Institute.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yeah. 3 really quick points. 2 from last night. 1, in terms of what we can do about it, is I think it's really important to put the issue on the global agenda. Irina talked about post-2015, and I really liked the idea that Mr. Blair talked about last night about making sure that the G20 and the G8 could possibly take this up as a serious issue. So I think that's one, and to do that, we will probably need all of your help. Certainly the business community has a strong voice for G8 and G20 agendas. So that's one important thing. And then the second thing is I think we really need to think very carefully about how the private sector and the public sector can work together. And that's the big focus of the next 2 days, this conference, which I think is great. And I wanted to give just a couple of thoughts as you all go into your different panels and deliberations around public-private partnerships from an educator's point of view. Sometimes there are excellent private sector actors doing excellent work in education, but from a minister's point of view, a government point of view where you're trying to guarantee the rights of everybody, there can be private sector actors who are not of quality, and how do we manage that? So I would really ask all of you, what are the spaces and ways in which private and public sector actors can come together? And it would be really important to be a little bit nuanced, to think about financing, perhaps separate from delivery. So you could have publicly financed private or public delivery. You could have privately financed public or private delivery. And I think thinking very carefully about those combinations and how to possibly guard against unintended consequences, which I'm happy to speak more about later, would be really fruitful for this discussion.
Well, as you say, that whole relationship of what the public and private sector can bring is an issue that I want to pick up on. I'd like to just bring in, we're very honoured to have Marwan with us today, the Undersecretary for Education for the UAE. So your perspective, please.
Yes, thank you. Hello? Yeah. I would like to bring to the audience the perspective of our leadership, to admire the establishment of this country where the education and access to quality education was made of their vision. The starting of this country with equal opportunity for both boys and girls. In 1950s, we have started the formal education in the country. However, by 1970s, there were 127 schools, formal schools for boys and girls spread all over UAE. This country before, there were no reports, no researchers, no, I can say, formal education already in place. However, with a vision and leadership, they given an access to a quality education and been based that education will play a major role to start up of this country. So I think a vision and strong leadership is the key to spread equality and have access education around the world.
And Tariq Al Gurg, I'm sure there won't be many people that will disagree with that. It takes strong vision, but we're talking from a global perspective. Just to bring your experience in terms of your work with Dubai Cares.
Well, how we do it in Dubai Cares is basically forging effective partnerships. Partnerships is a huge solution. Each partner would come in with his own experience. They would bring something new to the table. The implementing partners, whether they're international NGOs or UN aid agencies, they have a vast amount of experience of even implementing integrated programs, working on solutions of having education programs that would work on silos won't be as impactful as programs that will be integrated. And having said that, integrated programs would give you a better impact. Integrated programs would give you cost-efficient programs, but also integrated programming would also provide you with a solution to eliminate the underlying obstacles that prevent children having access to education and learning.
And can I ask you just to bring your microphone, because I'm also having difficulty hearing now as well. Now, there's been a partnership between yourself, Marwan, and Samsung. Mr. Kim is joining us today. Thank you so much, sir, from Samsung. Tell us a little bit about that and how you're affecting change. Marwan.
Yes, as a big program initiatives, the UAE government launched Smart Learning Initiative in all government schools to introduce technology to the all schools in UAE within 3 years. We have proudly partnership with a lot of companies. One of them is Samsung. And right now, there are 123 schools in UAE, federal governmental schools, are teaching with interactive technology and tablets. Our aim is to reach the UAE Vision 2021 to have a world-class education system in this country. It is an aim of this country leadership really to have a quality education, as I said. However, all tools, professional developments, trainings, professional teachers, educators are available here, and they have open access to all information, researches, and technology to provide the best and quality education to to our youngsters. However, still, we are taking smart initiatives as a tool. It's not the main aim of education. It is a language of our kids, and we have to teach them the way they want to be learned. It's not the way that everyone is before got taught through one way of communication. No, we are here with a different type of generation. We have to believe and ask what they need and deliver the way that really they want to be engaged and move to the higher scale. So technology is one tool to have a quality education for the country.
And technology, Mr. Kim, is obviously your area of expertise. What are maybe the main issues from your perspective that we need to address to effect dramatic change in the current education paradigm?
As a society, we face lots of obstacles, such as lack of investment and poor infrastructure and accessibility. And public sectors are leading to improve the overall education systems, including investment. On the other hand, private sectors support education systems by offering interactive education facilities and solutions. As a corporate citizen, Samsung is developing various programs with IT resources that allow children to have more education access. We also build and vitalize school facilities to create diverse education frameworks. For example, we build schools and libraries and classrooms in disadvantaged areas. And we provide solutions like Smart School. We try to expand access to education by, for example, supporting educational applications for disabled children in UAE, and also learning smart schools at children's hospitals in France, and making audiobooks for visually impaired children in Iran. These are some examples.
Thank you. And Rebecca, then we turn to that issue of what the corporations can bring in terms of education. Tony Blair last night acknowledging that there has been conflict or debate in the past, very polarizing debate about what the different sectors can bring. But what's your view?
I think that there is absolutely room for what in the corporate world is called shared value, where you can make a profit, you can be a good business, and also do good. To me, the real question, and I would love to learn over the next 2 days, is how does that work in education? What are the conditions? And let me give two examples. You mentioned just now, Kate, you asked the question, what are sort of the radical changes we need in education where public-private partnerships could make a difference? I think there's probably two that come to mind. There's many, but two. One is to really reach the marginalized. How do we, that's not something that we have been successful collectively as a community. Ministers of education struggle with it. So how do we make partnerships where you can go into rural areas, poor areas, reach marginalized groups as was mentioned, disabilities or other linguistic minorities. I want to give an example of, I'm going to give two examples of failed public-private partnerships just because I think we're going to hear a lot of success stories, but I think it's good to learn from failure and think about how do we do better. So I won't name the country, it's a country in sub-Saharan Africa where the ministry had done a public-private partnership to deliver primary education in rural areas. And it was going along fine until, because of population, and this was partly government funded and subsidized, until due to population movements, there was so few people in the schools that the private group was delivering that they said, it's not profitable anymore. We're out of here. We're leaving. So that isn't great because now the ministry is stuck with absolutely no infrastructure to deliver schooling. So how do we make sure we partner without getting these negative unintended consequences that could happen? And another one is around quality. I think that's the second area that we really want to delve into. and could make a massive difference. One about, as we talked about last night, how you can change the process of teaching and learning that's much more personalized, more at students' own pace, which is really a much better way for young people to learn. I think there's huge potential there. And here I want to sort of echo voices of teachers, many teachers that I've talked to, and I'll use an example, my own country, the United States, where there's lots of public-private partnerships, many of them highly successful, but some of them aren't great, and the piece that I've heard a lot of teachers, at least in my country, talk about is, you know, when sometimes some partnerships, the profit motive overrides teaching quality and what's needed for the kids. What might be needed for the kids is not actually what is going to be profitable. So how do we, you know, guard against that?
Salil, you wanted to pick up on that.
I want to just, in relation to this question of state versus non-state actors, I think, you know, we cannot really compromise, sorry, we can't compromise on the question of core state obligation to meet the right to education, because it has implications for all other rights. But in some ways, maybe it's a kind of a false dichotomy, because as we speak, a lot of provisioning of education is already happening through churches and through private actors. Now, the paradox we have is that the state system is better at being more inclusive because it's more open, it allows for everybody to come in, and the private system generally tends to be more efficient and innovative and better on quality. So we really have to crack these two problems. The state system needs to become more inclusive, but improve quality, and the private system needs to become much more inclusive. And in India, for example, the way they've tried to address this is by the right to education being enforced. So private schools are being effectively made mandatory for them to take children from poorer backgrounds, from girls, etc. And it's a very awkward situation, because you can imagine very elite schools struggling to take children from slums. So we haven't quite found a solution to this, and I think I think that's a core issue as to how do you crack this inclusion versus quality challenge.
Irina.
I think this is a very important aspect that we brought in terms of private-public partnerships. We speak about access and quality, the two issues that are the big challenges in education, and both of them can be, I think, rightfully tackled through private-public partnerships. On one side, the innovation that the private sector brings with the new technologies, with the mobile learning, with everything that is there at hand, helps immensely. I just mentioned projects that we have. In fact, UNESCO started in 2009 with Mobilink in Pakistan, the first ever project of using SMS for literacy, an extremely successful project. And then we published the guidelines for using mobile technology also for literacy education. But I think that inclusive access to education, reaching the marginalized exactly, can be done through these new technologies. And I can give many examples that we work. We speak about teachers, teacher training, of course. Teacher training we can do also in reaching out with these technologies. We have a wonderful cooperation with PepsiCo, setting a center of excellence for teacher training in technical vocational training in Myanmar, a country that is struggling with reforming the education system and having a new vision of how education can be put into the map. And with Panasonic, we cooperate also in Vietnam of education for sustainable development. So literacy with Procter & Gamble, there are wonderful examples that we have of public-private partnership. And let's not forget that we are here at this conference with the GEMS Foundation. And I think this is an extraordinary example of Mr. Sanivarki, who is a goodwill ambassador of UNESCO for public-private partnerships, of making this global advocacy for education, of putting education on the global map, together with the Dubai Care and all the other partners. I think this is the new commitment of the private sector for education that we see emerging in the world.
And if we all accept that, Tariq, let's ask you, how do we then better coordinate these efforts between the NGOs and the private sector? How do we better coordinate this effort that's started?
Well, Again, how we're doing it in Dubai Cares is forging partnerships, as I mentioned. Each partner brings something new to the table. I'll just give a very quick example on what we did with one of our programs in Mali. So we invested $16 million in Mali. We brought 5 partners on board. The government identified the gap. The gap was having washing schools. And before us going there were different NGOs trying to come in and different donors trying to come into Mali to solve the problem of washing schools. They were not able. They invested a couple of million. They couldn't. They left. We came in. We brought something new to the country. We brought 5 partners in. One of them is a UN agency. And we started working on washing schools in Mali. What we did with the 5 partners, they are working together on the same strategy, but they report to Dubai Cares individually, so we get direct reports from them. We have formed a committee that we all sit on. We attend the semi-annual meeting. We get monthly reports, we get quarterly reports. They themselves have their own internal meetings inside Mali. And then under the steering committee, we established a working group. That working group is in charge of monitoring and evaluation and learning. So what happens is that group goes and gets all the information from the field, all the finding, what's working, what is not, what can we improve on, and takes all the information to the committee. And the committee disseminates this information to its partners. So that kind of a coordination is actually working.
And that's collaboration then. I was just sort of wondering when you were saying that, who's the leader? Who makes the overall decision?
Kate, what has happened to this program, regardless of what happened in Mali and the coup, this program attracted additional $16 million from international donors because it has a successful model of coordination.
Okay, Marwan, did you want to pick up? Yeah.
Yes, I have a different perspective to the issue. We are talking about partnerships, and we believe it is one of the main solutions. But are we satisfied with the contribution of the private sector to the education, quality education? Some of the reports saying in 2012, there were 0.1 contribution of the private sector companies and shares to the education. We are hearing a lot about the CSR programs. Is those as a marketing initiatives or really sustainable programs for the countries to provide a proper and quality education? I think there is still a big opportunities for the private sector to come in and put a lot of efforts and gain and help countries in this globalization markets. Still, I don't believe the contribution is sufficient. There is a lot of opportunities, and we're still looking forward for more contribution in education. The private sector are benefiting from the educated human resources, from skilled human resources. However, the benefits are not seen really in the world. Still, we need more to come.
We're going to be calling for a pledge from more from the private sector actually over the coming days. So thank you very much for that. Just bringing those thoughts together, we need to reach the marginalised, we need to improve access and quality. Technology then can enable us to do that, as we've been hearing. So Mr. Kim, I wonder whether we, from your perspective, whether we need to rethink the traditional education system. What's your perspective from Samsung's perspective?
Yes, we do. As the other public system, we need to revitalize traditional education systems based upon various economic and political and social situations. It has been known that schools have been the source of learning, and the teachers have been the knowledge of the base for a long time. Nowadays, students are more familiar with mobile device and software than their teachers. This means that teachers cannot catch students' attention with traditional way of learning and teaching and tools. So therefore, they need to be more interactive and of course engage with the students by mobile learning tools. American educational reformer John Dewey once said, "If we reach today, as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow." What this means is, if we kept teaching new generations the same way we taught kids 50 years ago, our knowledge will never expand, even or grow. With the use of mobile devices, like smartphones, tablets, networks, and solutions, teachers can monitor the progress of students in real time. And students also will learn more pleasantly and concentrate on their learning efficiently.
Can I ask that to all of you? Because it was something that I was just trying to find my notes from last night, actually, but we spoke about making our children or allowing our children to become more digitally literate, as it were. Rebecca, just picking up on that thought then, is technology going to change our traditional education systems?
Yeah, I think ultimately it will in the long run. And there is a debate in the education community. Some may know Mozilla, the maker of Firefox. They have a foundation, and one of the things they're dedicated to is really thinking seriously about digital literacy. And they claim it's the fourth literacy, so it's the next wave. And it's not only how you we need to be literate in not only surfing the web and understanding and analyzing, but also how to create and put things out on the web, and also safety, new norms for a whole sphere of engagement that we don't actually have a lot of norms for. So I think that's one area that's going to be incredibly transformative, and there probably will be many others.
And Salil, we were talking about the number of children who do now have access to mobile phones. It's on the rise. Can we make use of that?
No, I think the traditional idea that learning comes from the school system, I think is fundamentally challenged. And I think more and more we have to think about learning as a much more comprehensive process. And in fact, the majority of the stuff that kids learn is actually not from when they're inside the classrooms. And the sooner we come to terms with that, the better it is. But I think that when you are asking, do we need to rethink traditional education systems? Yes, technology changes the way in which we interact with each other. But in fact, the other dimension to it, which actually both addresses the access issue and the quality issue, is the issue of accountability. And interestingly, that's not very unconnected from the technology question, because the way in which we are beginning to interact with state systems, with the education system, is much more real time. So one of the, in my experience, having worked in education for many decades now, one of the fundamental reasons why government schools don't tend to be very efficient and high on quality is because the accountability to the local community, to the parents and even the children is so low. And because the private sector, you have to be accountable because they're fee-paying parents. So you are much more interactive and much more accountable to the consumers. So that's a big question. And I think with technology, people are even more exposed to what is possible. So I think the issue of accountability, particularly at the local level, needs to be a game changer as we move away from traditional systems.
Tariq.
Well, we're talking about two things here. We're talking about traditional systems. We're talking about bringing technology in, which is a new system. If you compare the education system in the United States with the education system in a sub-Saharan African country, those are two different systems. And we are all aware that a lot of Western countries have moved away from the chalk and talk system. The question is the chalk and talk model working? Yes, it has been working for a long time. Is it the best effective way for learning? I would say not. There are better models, better effective ways. Can it be replaced? It's hard. It's hard to replace. We've been doing this for decades. It's going to take a long time. And if we're going to replace it, are we going to replace it in parallel? Are we going to introduce the new system alongside the previous system and gradually eliminate the old system and then go ahead with a new one? Or just an immediate elimination to the old one and go ahead with a new one? That's another debate that we have to talk also. And moving to technology, well, I don't think technology is the silver bullet to solve the education system. You have to train the teachers on this new technology. The teacher will always be the medium. And the teachers will take this technology and teach those children. They have to understand the technology first, and then they would move on to those children.
Marwan, I'll put those points to the two of you, actually. Marwan, your thoughts on that?
It's on the same. Everybody is talking about the technology, but we have to emphasize that technology is an enabler only. We have to think about the roles, role of principals, teachers, parents, students, all the holder of the educational system. We have to change the policies. We have to change the curriculums. Are we teaching the right things? Or it's only the technology that will bring the solutions to us? No, we have to have a mind shift to everything that we do in education system. The technology is an enabler, but there's a lot of things, roles should be changed and move forward to really reach to those kids in the classrooms. They are different, and we're all sure that they are getting learned and engaged differently. That's why we have to change also the way that we provide the education to them, and we have to change our mindset, policies, roles, really to serve that aim.
And Irina?
I can only agree with that. I want to emphasize this point. Technology gives us the possibility to reach out, but we have to know also that digital divide still exists in the world. We have started 3 years ago with the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, an initiative that we call the Broadband Commission. It was a joint initiative between UNESCO and ITU with the participation of the private sector, with the government, with the academic community, to promote broadband, to promote connectivity. I think this is extremely important because we have to know that in many parts of the world still this doesn't exist. So this is one side, but the other side, of course, is the content. And I think this is most important. The local contact. We want to promote multilingualism. We want to promote the use of mother tongues in many parts of the world. This is critical if we want to involve communities and families and to give kids at the primary level at least access to education. So content is critical in some of this, and new technologies gives us this possibility if we know how to use it and if we promote connectivity in those remote areas. So having the two sides, once again, the technology, the right content, the ownership and the leadership, political will of governments and involving them, and what content then in terms of values, of how we promote indeed something that we want to make global citizens nowadays in the world, I think we can achieve then the results.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we are just about out of time, so I think what I'd like to do is ask each of you for a brief, if you will, thought, your own perspective then on how we can best, a thought for us to take away, in your view, how we can best put a quality education within the reach of every child. Rebecca.
No pressure, right? Well, one of the things that actually I realize several of us on the panel have been working on is really trying to come to some agreement globally. I mentioned a bit last night around what are the core competencies that we want all kids to master, no matter where they are. And it's literacy, it's numeracy, it's things like global citizenship, digital literacy. And so there's an effort within the global education community really to come to consensus on what those core competencies are. And we've come to a pretty close consensus. And now the question is, how do you assess those parts of student learning in a way that can actually improve learning? And that's a really big effort that actually we would love all of your participation in, particularly the ministers, private sector as well. But many countries around the world don't actually know how their kids are doing on really important core 21st century competencies. And if we could assess them and feed that information back into teachers' hands so they know, school administration hands, school administrators' hands so they know how to support their teachers, as well as policymakers so they know where to direct resources, I think that could be a really big improvement.
Okay, Salil.
So I think two things from my perspective. One, I think if everybody agrees that education is a fundamental right, how do you make sure that this is actually enforced and justiciable, particularly for girls, for minorities? You know, there has to be a remedy, a way in which people can claim this right. And interestingly, it's, you know, you could think of this as girls in Afghanistan or displaced people, etc., but it's also in rich countries. I mean, Irina will know that in Europe, the issue of the neglect and discrimination against Roma children, children from the Roma community. So the Czech Republic, we've done studies on the extent to which children are excluded because they belong to Roma families. So I think that's one core issue for the future. The second issue, which is a much deeper question, today marks the third year of the Syrian conflict. And you know, millions of people have been displaced, thousands and tens of thousands have lost their lives. And if you think about it, if Syria was a rights-respecting society, would we have been facing this situation? And one wonders about this when you think of conflicts across the world. So this goes back to the content question. You know, there's a lot of lip service saying that our schools and the curriculum should include values of human dignity and human rights. But in practice, very few schools actually make sure these things happen. And if we don't do this, we're going to face more and more challenges. You might educate people, but there's more and more educated unemployed. But if you don't learn to respect people, if you don't believe in the dignity and equality of all human beings, we have big problems. So human rights friendly schools is very, very crucial.
Okay, Mr. Kim, a final thought from you. These are long sentences. I'll ask you to be as brief as we can.
Education is top priority in every society. The use of internet plays an important role in education in developing countries and developed countries. But there are always disadvantaged people with limited access to education. Thus, we need to provide more opportunities of quality education. On the other hand, the status of infrastructure and educational environment are different in developing and developed countries. Thus, we need to have a different approach to meet different environments. For emerging countries, building schools and supplying educational equipment is the top priority. A good examples are Samsung transformed shipping containers into solar-powered internet schools in Africa. We also made smart libraries in Vietnam. And for developed countries, the fundamental infrastructure is already set up. Thus, we provide smart school and software and coding solutions for disadvantaged students to have equal access to education.
Thank you. Tariq?
I'll be very quick on this one,
Thank
I promise. So my first advice is for everyone to look into the Learning Metrics Task Force report. The report has been spearheaded by Brookings Institution and UNESCO. Dubai Cares was also part of it. And what the report gives is what works in education. And there's a big focus on learning. The biggest issue today is learning. That is the biggest issue. And my three things is to focus on is early childhood education, primary education, and teacher training.
Thank you.
I believe three things also we can take over from here is that increase the contribution of the private sectors, especially the NGOs and the education. It's a must. Secondly, we'll have to invest more in technology and content. It is the future. Lastly is the training and teacher professional training. The teacher is the key and we have to put a lot of emphasis and investments on the development and professional development of those categories. Thank you.
Thank you. And Irina, last word to you.
I would use the title of the initiative of the Secretary General, Put Education First. Education is one of the best investments that a government and private sector can make. Invest in girls' education, invest in quality education, invest in teachers. And then finally, I think now that we are formulating the next post-2015 agenda, the United Nations should adopt a standalone goal in access to quality and lifelong learning, in quality education and lifelong learning. I think this is the best support that we can all do to governments, to the marginalized, so that in the future we can mobilize national resources and international aid and the private sector also around education. We need in the post-2015 a stand-alone goal on access to quality education and lifelong learning for all.
Irina, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to all of you for our first plenary this morning. Thank you very much.